It's been tough because with the student caps, and then the lead up to the last election and the sort of tit for tat anti-immigration.
Dog whistling.
Yeah, all of that. But it was particularly hard in the private sector because the caps reduced the potential for the sector considerably, more so than for the universities,
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Ngunnawal country in Canberra. And I'm really stoked about today's guest, an old friend, Peter Gainey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. It's great. I've been looking forward to it.
I have been too, like 2 years, right?
Yes.
In fact,
sitting by the phone for 2 years.
It's funny because when I sort of had the idea I wanted to do a podcast, you're one of the first people I reached out to. I must have only been a couple of months in, and I was like, I've got to get Peter on. Because it's one of these things, we've been crossing paths for many years, had nice little convivial chats.
Yeah.
But we haven't really had a chance to sit down and have a good deep dive.
No. We've been meeting, crossing paths, as you say, since 2005, I think.
Yeah, it goes back to Macquarie.
It does, yeah.
And that would have been the scholarship days, right?
It was, yeah. Interesting days.
They were.
Interesting program, yeah.
So why don't we start there? Look, for those people who haven't heard of, and we need to break this up, don't we? The Scholarship.
That's right.
What was the Scholarship project?
And interesting you say it like that because, our elevator pitch, half of it was saying scholar and then the long pause and then ship and then elevator had arrived already. So what it was a university at sea. We ran a program, semester-long program. The ship would traverse half of the world in one semester and then would continue around, back to where it started in the second semester. It was... At the core of it was intercultural leadership, as it was then. So developing international leadership skills within an international sort of hothouse environment, I suppose, because all the students were on the ship for the full semester. Well, they weren't on the ship for the full semester. They were on the voyage for the full semester, mostly working on those intercultural leadership skills development sort of projects, but then when they were in ports, they worked on academic programs that were related to their home institution degree studies, so international business, environmental studies, those sorts of things. So they would be in port and they would go off and work on projects. They may be connecting with businesses in those ports. If they were in Portugal, they might have been looking at, Portuguese business styles, and some of them went off and they worked on environmental projects. There might have been water, irrigation, farming techniques, lots of different things. So, but in short, there were. Should I go on?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Okay. There were 7 universities involved. Macquarie, of course, was the transcripting partner for it. And, we were very lucky to have had Tony Adams, the late and great Tony Adams, was a big supporter and a big believer in the programs, and yourself and John Maloney and others. So Macquarie, University Al Hawain from Morocco, Cardiff University from Wales, University of California, Berkeley, Monterey Tech was one of the other ones, Fudan in China. So really key international, all leaders in internationalisation of education.
One of those things, I think it's just become like a little lost, full stop somewhere in Australian international education. And I remember when this ship came into Sydney Harbour, because it only sailed a few times. I think the money side, I can't remember exactly what happened, but... it had 2 voyages. So it kicked off in 2005, the seed funding came from Royal Caribbean. That's right.
Out of Miami. A couple of years to get the program all together, and then 2 voyages. But unfortunately, 2008.
Financial crisis.
Global financial crisis.
Yeah,
Oil hit $150 US a barrel. It was costing $90,000 a day to run the ship. And the Royal Caribbean shareholders didn't have the appetite for it. So
isn't that a pit? Like, you just think about how different the world could have been. Because that really was. I remember I started to tell that story when the ship came into Sydney Harbour and it was docked around at what's now Barangaroo. And I remember going down to see it. And this is this thing that we'd heard about for 18 months. And suddenly I was so overwhelmed by emotion. You know, these students on board and academics travelling with them, just thinking that this is like the best international experience out there.
Yeah, and I think it was. And even the ship itself, it was a beautiful old ship, if you'll remember. It was a great big, all the timber decking, and it wasn't like a cruise ship today, which looks like a small city, almost looks like a high-rise, tower. It wasn't like that at all. It was a real classic old ship, and and it was very disappointing because a lot of us, we were very emotionally, as you say, you feel emotional, we were very emotionally invested in the success of that program.
How did you end up there?
I spoke at what was the IDP conference in Sydney, would have been, I think, 2004 or 2005. We were still talking about the basics of international student recruitment in those days. And there was somebody, actually the managing director from the program was there in the audience, there really to gather information about international student recruitment, and heard me speak and asked me to come on board. So I then went over to Miami and was there when we first laid out the academic program.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so prior to that, what were you working in or as when you did that presentation?
I'd been a consultant for 6 or 7 years, I think. And mostly, in fact, I did hardly any work for Australia. My experience all came from working with particularly Wollongong University and the ANU. But my consulting clients were all in the US, the UK, Spain, France, the Netherlands in particular, Italy. So I was sort of selling on that Australian experience, I suppose.
So what's it like? Because most people will never experience this when you're working for yourself and then suddenly you're back working inside an organisation. It's quite a leap, isn't it?
When I went back into full-time work in 2010, it was a major adjustment and a bit of an ego adjustment as well, to be honest, because I no longer was autonomous. And, I had to adjust to that, to having others to answer to. Right. Of course, you're answering to your clients as well, but you don't have that autonomy of time.
What else was challenging about that? And sorry, I'm being a bit selfish here because, I've run my own businesses for a number of years, but there have been times where it's been hard. Yeah. And we've been saying to ourselves, oh my God, like if we're going to have to give up on this and go and get a job in an organisation. And so I've literally been thinking about that over the years. Like, what would that feel like? I
was quite lucky with the institution that I went into was already, had recently become a client, and I liked the people there, and it was the creative industries, and I was very interested in that. But in terms of what the other motivation, of course, is financial factors. You do get sick and tired of not being able to chart your income for the year. And because a lot of my clients, well, almost all by then were overseas, I had to deal with exchange rate fluctuations as well. And that was great when it was US dollar was buying, two of ours, and most of my income was in US dollars. But when it was in 50 cents, it was much harder. So you're working twice as hard for, the same amount of money.
It's just give me a memory of when we started AIM Overseas, our first business and overseas study provider, and we charged for this program we'd fixed the Australian dollar cost for a program over in Britain, and one of these students had paid a very expensive program overseas, and they called us at some point and they said, I just want to make sure everything's okay with my fees. And we said, well, yeah, you've paid your fees, everything's fine. And then, of course, we hadn't twigged to the fact the exchange rate had essentially dropped 10% and had not only just evaporated our entire margin, but we were on the hook for this student's program overseas. And we had to pay, getting paid the overseas provider. But just like the wake up that gives you is ridiculous.
That's right. Yeah. Because, there's a lot of responsibility comes with that. And I know that's, been an issue for agents quite a few times over the years. And the good ones have somehow managed to still pay those fees, and some bad ones not.
We were lucky in the sense it was our first year, And straight away we went, we can never, ever have that happen again. So straight away we actually set up foreign currency accounts, and we set it up so as soon as we received payments in from a student, that would then get transferred into foreign currency, not same day, but within a few days.
Yeah.
And that way we basically negated our currency exposure as best we could. Yeah, but it was quite an experience.
Yeah. I can remember being in Seoul during the Asia financial crisis in December 1997 and the won dropping so fast that on Monday I was in a 3-star hotel and by Friday I'd moved to a 5-star hotel, literally.
It's good when it works in your favour, isn't it?
Yes, it does sometimes.
Yeah, and then when it doesn't, it's a scary roller coaster to be holding on to when you're just kind of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Yeah. Actually, that's kind of like the consulting game in general, isn't it? It's like when things are good, you're just like, I can keep doing this for forever.
Yeah.
And then when it's running against you, you're just, wondering why the universe is treating you like that.
Yeah, and a good consultant, I think, does spend a third of their time generating the next project. I was never that smart. I was always so focused on doing the work that I'd been, paid to do. And then that's why it ebbed and flowed quite a bit.
Yeah, really tricky.
Yeah.
What's your favourite place in the world?
Well, I spent 7 years in Japan running Wollongong University's office, as you know.
Oh, no, I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, that's where I started. That was 1990. That was very early days.
Yeah, wow.
I had gone to Japan with a backpack. I was a land surveyor, actually, originally.
Okay. So let's put Japan on the shelf for a moment. Let's go to the landscape.
Land surveying. Yeah.
That's quite a jump.
Yeah, well, I was a land surveyor with the Australian government, with the federal government, based in Sydney, but living in Wollongong. And I took a year leave without pay and grabbed a backpack and went to Japan. And it grew from there. Christmas 1989, I was doing some work with Kawasaki City. Nothing to do with surveying, mind you. And that was what it was like in Japan in those days. I taught an Australian studies course, which I was not qualified to be teaching, but it seemed to go okay, with Kawasaki City. And Kawasaki was Wollongong's sister city. That Christmas, when I went home for a holiday, I went to the university, to the language centre actually, and suggested I could do a little bit of work with Kawasaki City because just this interest in recruiting international students was kicking off. So I went to the university and had a conversation and asked for a small amount of money to do that for them, and walked out after lunch with considerably more than I'd asked for. So that they were very interested in, and Wollongong was becoming quite entrepreneurial. I went back to Japan and started to do some marketing for the language centre, but then the university wanted to get involved at a broader level. And it was funny because in those days, so people were saying to me from the education sector in Australia, they go, well, Wollongong's been very aggressive internationally. Now, within 2 years, those same people were saying, Wollongong's been very successful internationally.
Yeah,
So, and then Wollongong asked Flinders in New England to come into that operation. So we ended up with a bigger office and staff and, a much bigger budget.
So what do you enjoy most about spending time in Japan? Because that's enough time to really put down some roots, isn't it?
Yeah. 7 years is a fair amount of time. What do I like most about it? Getting out of the big cities is one thing. I've been really from Hokkaido right down to Okinawa. Spent a lot of time, although I was based in Tokyo, spent a lot of time outside. And, there's some beautiful countryside and, gentle people and crowded, of course. It has its challenges, but everything works so well. Now, the other country I was going to say is Sweden, where I have spent quite a bit of time. And I like the fact that Scandinavia is a little bit off the beaten path in a way. Everybody goes south in Europe, in summertime, and there's something that I'm very comfortable when I'm there, and
it's too bloody expensive. I think I would have loved to spend more time up there when I was backpacking and the like, but I think when you're just like looking at the dollars in your wallet, and you could back then this was pre-Euro, and Germany was really inexpensive. Italy was really inexpensive. I don't know, just like the frugal backpacker, had to make the pragmatic choice.
Yeah, that's true. Although Sweden's nowhere near as bad as Norway in terms of cost. And the third country I'd say is Vietnam. because the way the first time I went there was end of 1994. And
that's very early.
Yeah, and I just found it really interesting and exciting, and just sort of continued to be that way. And having had 15 years working in education related to the creative industries, I'm really interested in the music that's coming out of Vietnam now, and some of the film stuff that's being done.
Let's jump in there. So creative industries. So you were working at JMC for many, many years.
15 years. Yeah,
excellent institution. What have you seen change in that space during that time?
In the creative education area?
Because, for example, technology. We're sitting here, we're recording on a beautiful stream deck. I could be streaming this live to, here, there and everywhere right now. We could be processing it through AI and doing all sorts of amazing stuff.
Yeah.
15 years ago, it looked very, very different.
Yeah. Yes and no.
That's a fair point,
music's still music, and performance is still performance. And sure, you can manipulate sound, and that technology is making that more and more possible. You can play a lot more with film, and got a lot more virtual production now, and doing away with green screens and that sort of thing. But the core talent is, it's somebody singing a song, or somebody acting, or somebody directing, and so I wouldn't say great changes in that respect. Yeah.
Are you bullish on the future of the performing arts, for example, in the face of this technology? Or are you worried for its existence?
No, I think I'm bullish. Yeah. I think, and in terms of international education, we're going to see a lot more mobility of talent in that area as well. It's still niche. There's no doubt about that. The numbers are still never going to be big. But that's another thing about a country like Sweden, where they've got fantastic creative high schools, where, the last 3 years of high school, I might do 500 hours of, music practice and things like that. Yeah. So you get great talent out of there. They love to come to Australia. They love to go to the other end of the world as far as possible. They get here and they've got to wait for the Australian students to catch up a little bit. Yeah. So we've got to keep them occupied. So you've got that, and then you've got these emerging markets like Vietnam, with now that they're becoming more affluent, and parents are letting them go overseas and study creative courses, and so more and more of that. So more of those students are getting the opportunity to live out their dream. So
when you're a kid, because you've been here, been so many places, had this kind of globe-trotting. Did you grow up in a situation where you might have ever imagined that it would end up like this?
No, definitely not. Yeah. And the fact that I went to Japan because I really didn't have any money to travel, but there was work there. You knew that there was work there in the 80s. The yen was everywhere. You couldn't avoid it, sort of thing. But had I not had an interest in studying Japanese language before I went, which I did, I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have gone to Japan, so I probably wouldn't have gone anywhere.
And so why were you interested in Japanese? What was the kernel for that?
Well, in Wollongong at that time, because I didn't study full-time, it was a part-time sort of thing, a couple of nights a week. It was German or Japanese.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I chose Japanese. Yeah, which was probably the right choice.
Yeah, probably was.
Yeah.
It's true, actually. It sort of had this big explosion in popularity, didn't it? So that sort of came through the 80s and everything as, Japanese language was picking up and up and up.
Yeah.
Where's that these days? Sort of a little bit of drift of where language teaching is at these days?
Yeah, I'd say so because, it was such a strong economy then. It was the bubble era in Japan. And so everybody was aware of that, and it was so important, and of course our tourism industry was sort of riding on the back of the Japanese tourist market, but they've since shrunk, I guess.
It's pretty much the whole Gold Coast is there for that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of that investment, early investment for all that major construction, came from there. It's funny how the world evolves, isn't it? Up and down, peaks and troughs.
And of course, teaching of Indonesians sort of dropped off so much as well, and to our detriment.
I think so.
Certainly, yeah.
110 million people sitting up on our northern shore. And we don't really. Yeah, and sorry, I'm saying that I'm ignorant as well, but I'm very curious. Would love to have more time to dig in and understand our neighbours better.
You know, it was a big turning point. I was living in Vietnam when the 97 election, which really changed, you know, the crest of the Keating embrace Asia era sort of came to an end, you know, and I was around a lot of people, AusAid, Austrade, organisations that were really invested in our role or our place in Asia, and there was a lot of disappointment at that time, and I think things have gradually gone downhill since.
It's interesting now, because this might timestamp the recording a little bit, but this year the Labor government just won a stomping majority in the lower house, so it's kind of almost the first time in, well, pretty much since Howard, 20 years, that we've got a very stable absolute majority government. And I don't know about you, but it feels like the decision-making process has stabilised. Like, there's much less kind of drama in the media about what's going on. I'm not making any comment about whether I agree or disagree on what they're doing, but I just feel like the tenor of the conversation has changed. And I think about the international ed side, you know, New Colombo Plan, you know, government's now changing the focus onto priority countries, longer experiences. Yeah, it's just an interesting time, I think, in terms of Australia's engagement in the region.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Government's got a bit more time to focus on it rather than focusing on the day-to-day, like, let's get people's attention and their votes.
The last couple of years have been, I think, particularly difficult for the private sector, of course. And, sorry, I'm sort of bringing that conversation around.
Yeah, please, yeah.
You know, it's been tough because with the caps, with the student caps, and then the lead up to the last election and the sort of tit-for-tat anti-immigration. So,
dog whistling.
Yeah, all of that. But it was particularly hard in the private sector because the caps reduced the potential for the sector considerably, more so than for the universities, you know.
On just the complete lack of fairness.
Yeah.
The complete lack of fairness with the way that was handled. I think you and I were talking, I won't give specific numbers, but I remember you and I were talking last year and you gave me some example of, you know, like 90% decline in what you're allowed to then actually do with no consultation, dropped on you at no. I mean,
that's right, yeah.
It was unbelievable. I think we're going to look back in a few years and just be like, what?
And when you mention New Colombo Plan, of course, private sector, students in the private sector don't have access to that.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, they don't have access to OS Help. And why those students are disadvantaged, I have no idea. I've never understood.
That's a fair point, actually. Yeah, we need to get cracking on that with a bit of advocacy.
There was some funding there was a program called ICEP, which became Endeavour, I think, or the other way around. And so there were grants for students from the private sector to take up into those grants. They were limited, of course, but then the Morrison government cut that program as well. So there was nothing. There was no support for private sector students to have an international experience.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So we're recording this at AIEC, and when you just walk around the exhibit hall here and you see the diversity in the organisations and the institutions, and, you know, that diversity is good. I think it's not just good for a sector, but it's good for a country to have opportunities and options for people to select between. You've obviously been doing this a long time now, Peter, so you must get some, you know, nice warm feelings when you sort of walk into a place like this and see so many familiar faces.
Definitely. And I've been coming to AIEC or IDP conferences since 1994, I think, which was when I went and set up the ANU's office in Bangkok, and which was the first wholly Australian university-owned rep office in East Asia. So I've met so many people over the years, and that's really what I've always enjoyed about the work, is the people. And because I think it's still very much relationship-based. Whatever's happened with technology, you can't beat a good, strong friendship, I think, with the people that you're working with, engaging with, doing business with. And I think that's the Australian... I do think... I'm going to really sort of blow Australia's trumpet here, but why we did so well early on in international education, and I think compared to, for example, the UK and for other reasons, the US, was that relationship building, that face-to-face. And during COVID, when everybody said, well, it's all going to be on Zoom, you know, once we get through this pandemic, we knew that was not true. That as soon as somebody landed in KL and took their agent or their university, their articulation partner out to lunch, it was back on. It was back to relationships. And the other thing, and I don't think we can fake it. I don't think it's in our nature to fake a strong friendship. You might get away with it once or twice, but in the longer term, you're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to fool everybody all the time.
It gets sniffed out pretty fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I've always liked. I've loved the relationships. And, with JMC, we developed articulations in Argentina, in Brazil, in Colombia, in India, in Sweden. And that's all it's all been about. And particularly in the creative sector, it's all been about those relationships and common interests. No matter what culture it was, there was always a common interest that we're able to build on.
You're a real pioneer, man. It's funny, we've just been talking, for, half an hour now, but all these things that you've essentially started from scratch, whether you've been doing it for yourself in your own business or doing it for other organisations, that's an amazing skill set to have developed.
And it's developed organically, of course, but it doesn't always. It's great to have an entrepreneurial spirit, but if your employers or your clients don't think the same way, even though they're writing the checks, if great ideas just end up in the bottom of a drawer, that can be very dispiriting as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Tell us about that experience in Bangkok then with the ANU.
Well, that was... So after I left Japan and I went to the ANU and proposed opening an office, an Asia regional office.
Actually, just before you get... So how did you even have the idea to do that? To go and tap ANU on the shoulder and say, hey, I think I've found something for you guys. Is that relationships too? You knew people?
Yeah, I knew people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I sort of knew where to go. And, the experience in Japan was fantastic. Wollongong did best out of that. It was the squeaky wheel. Wollongong was the squeaky wheel, so it got the oil, and that was very successful. And then, through connections into the ANU. So we set up that office in Bangkok. The country that got the least attention was Thailand because I was always somewhere else. And that sort of took me out of being a Japan hand, really, because that was one of the things I was worried about when I was in Japan, that I would be stuck in that mold. And I really did need to get out and learn more about education systems and policies and developing networks in countries outside of Japan. So it sort of went to then Pan-Asia, and then, another decade later I was in Latin America and Europe.
It's funny though, because as you're saying that, you're like, oh no, I didn't want to be pigeonholed into this, but plenty of people are.
Yeah.
So there's something in you which is just kind of I can see it coming, and I know that I don't want to be pigeonholed.
Yeah. It was definitely a decision. It was a...
Do you know why, though? Have you ever thought about, I wonder why I love the pointy edge of the new thing, you know what I mean?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's an interesting observation in a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't know, Rob. Yeah. I haven't really thought about it, but yeah. But I just always wanted to add to, my knowledge. And in the early 2000s, as I think I did T&E stuff for mainly Dutch universities. I had worked with a very entrepreneurial university out of the Netherlands in a consulting role, and we did particularly T&E in South Africa and Thailand in Bangkok again. And that was they were the days when nobody really knew what transnational meant. Yeah, and I was very fortunate because I worked with some great people from the Netherlands, and I learned a lot from them as much as I was able to teach them as well. So that was sort of apropos of pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking about being in Bangkok and doing that work 7-8 years after I'd been based there. So, using that knowledge, but in a different area.
I imagine you've been back to Bangkok subsequently. Has it changed a lot as a city, as a place?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's never been an easy place to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't spent a lot of time in Bangkok, but it's one of those, the whole world is there, right? I mean, from the people who have nothing right through to, the most fancy bling-bling that you ever imagine.
Yeah. No, it's definitely changed remarkably. There was no monorail, BTS, underground or anything like that, when I moved there. But it was the perfect hub for the office. Most of the UK universities have had their hubs in KL, for historical reasons, perhaps.
Makes sense, yeah.
But I think for us, Bangkok was a much more strategic location, a better location to be.
What do you want to do next?
Oh, that's a good question. I think
Where's your attention drawn? So maybe rather than being too specific, but where's your attention drawn to in the industry at the moment? What's kind of got your eye and making you going, oh, that's curious over there. There's something going on over there.
India. To answer that geographically, India excites me. A bit like Southeast Asia was 30 years ago. Also not easy, but exciting. Yeah, a very colourful place. Lots of potential, lots of challenges. And I've got some really good connections in India who are in the creative industries, in performance, in Bollywood and production and stuff like that. But also still, I've got a weak spot for Indonesia as well. Yeah, it's just such an interesting, diverse place. And I feel like no matter how many places I've been to in Indonesia, I'm still just sort of scratching the surface.
It's like you need a doppelganger, right? You need like a digital twin. I think that's what they call them these days, the AI avatars, digital twin who actually just stays here in Australia and does work for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And then human Peter Gainey gets on a plane and goes travelling.
Yeah, which has always been the
Exploring.
way. Yeah, it really has. Because, when I think back to my consulting days, people would buy into you. It didn't matter how many staff you had. They want you to be the face of the institution, doing the deals. And that sort of limits your growth in a way, as you probably realised and you've had to deal with your businesses.
You're your own bottleneck, aren't you?
Yeah.
Sometimes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And anything else before we hit stop that you might have wanted to get to or to talk about?
I did write about what we did at JMC during COVID. I don't know if you wrote something on LinkedIn a couple of years ago about it. And JMC in 2022, February 2022 was the best international intake ever. And that's directly after COVID. What we did was none of the international team lost their jobs. I said that because if you think about all the downturns, my first one was after Tiananmen, when a lot of English schools went bust. Because the Chinese students stopped coming. And that was a very important lesson. Never have all your eggs in one basket, right? We had that, and we had the AFC, the GFC, and then and COVID. So the downturns were all 2 years. And so I bet on this one being 2 years based on the law of averages. And that's what it was. It was 2 years. So we kept all of the team in place, in work, offshore offices in Indonesia and Malaysia particularly, and then we had Latin America a little bit later in India. But everybody kept their jobs. We had to move them around a bit, put them in projects in other departments and things like that. But they maintained all of their relationships and contacts. And that was one that I learned actually in South Korea during the AFC, because agencies went from 30 staff to 3. And those of us who continued to travel there and maintain our relationships, instead of looking the quick pivot to another market, are the ones that reap the rewards. And so we did that during COVID, and subsequently it was 2022 intake was 35% higher than 2019. So valuable lessons, I think, yeah.
Given your experiences, what mistake do you think Australia, very broadly speaking, is making right now then? That we're being complacent about, like that there's something coming up towards us that we're just not paying attention to?
Yeah, well, I think it's that notion of fair weather friends. Yeah, we just we're not consistent enough. And despite what I said about relationships and being good at personal relationships, now we're constricted by policies. Yeah, which is undermining that historical strength. And I think that's a real pity.
Yeah. God, that's such a good... I'm just thinking about to the early 2000s and the collegiality, the competitive collegiality amongst people during that time, all the way through the noughties, so to speak. people competing very hard but collaborating very well. And government essentially standing back and saying, we can see you guys have got this covered, like putting in some guardrails. There was legislation. ESOS came about during that time. So, doing that work, but not just sort of squashing that.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's hazard in that.
Yes, I think bureaucracy, politics, policy has interfered with what we've been good at in a lot of ways. And I won't say which country it is, but I was at a dinner once in Bangkok, and a particular country, higher education providers were in for an event, and there was a dinner, and half of the table were the old universities, and the other half of this big long table, they were the new professional universities. There was such a distinction, and we've never been like that. Never. I hope it doesn't, the way the system's been manipulated in the last few years doesn't lead to that sort of attitude, because like you say, collegiality has been key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So for those people who might be listening to this earlier in their career, mid-career, and thinking like, oh, I kind of want to get to that stage, where that's kind of coming at me, what would you tell them? Because I believe in what you're saying, right? It's like the way you interact with people on a human level, and the way that, for me, like I write a lot on LinkedIn, so that's kind of one of my outputs, if that makes sense. But the way you engage with people is what actually then draws people to you. Yeah. That's the way I see it. But what do you think?
I think anybody who might be planning a career in international education, because I think you can do that now, right? You can say, this is what in our day, it was you sort of fell into it. One thing led to another, and you didn't have to have the qualification, but if you had the experience or the know-how, then you could do the work, and you were able to sell yourself to be able to deliver what you've been suggesting. I always, in speaking to students, doing seminars with students, at the end I always say, go somewhere. It doesn't have to be Australia. It doesn't have to be the US. It doesn't have to go somewhere, and then the world opens up. And that's what happened for me. So a land surveyor ended up living in 4 different countries, having a 35-year career in international education because I went somewhere. So just do it. Yeah, see life change. See the opportunities that you never knew were there.
That feels like the perfect place for us to wrap up. Peter Gainey, thank you so much for joining
Thanks, Rob.
Global Horizons.
Yeah, that was great. Cheers, mate.
Good on you.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.